Let's bring in 97.3 ESPN.com Eagles insider and NFL columnist John McMullen, who was there for Howie Roseman's presser today. He wrote about it at 97.3 ESPN.com. Also, the coordinators spoke today, one of which being Frank Reich, who told LeGarrette Blount, hey, keep doing what you're doing. So, Johnny Mac, number one, are you surprised that Howie Roseman pulled off another deal which looks like it's favorable to Philadelphia?
No, I'm never surprised when Howie pulls off a deal because he likes trading so much. And, hey, it's a worthwhile gamble from a talent perspective. There's no question about that. So really the only thing debatable here is whether he is going to upset the team's chemistry, and that's a legitimate concern considering the narrative coming from South Florida. Which I think is kind of ironic because you have a 39-year-old head coach calling a 24-year-old kid basically immature. Because make no mistake, this is all coming from Adam Gase, and you could argue the opposite, and that the 39-year-old head coach is acting immature. So we'll see how it shakes out. But from a talent standpoint, hey, this is a big thing for the Eagles, and certainly giving up a fourth-round pick is not much when you consider the risk-reward of this trade.
By the way, John McMullen's appearance brought to you by Gino, the winemaker's choice for 50 years. Visit Gino Pinto on the White Horse Pike in Hamilton, online at GinoPinto.com. Gino, the winemaker's choice for 50 years. Howie Roseman said LeGarrette Blount remains the starter, but then he kind of backtracked and said, well, I don't want to give people, their roles on this team, but how do you envision Blount, Ajayi, Clement, Wendell all working out?
Well, that's the big question, and that's the concern. And I think Howie kind of, backed off, as you mentioned, starter, because that's not his role. That's the coaching staff's role. And we'll see how they handle it. That was what Doug talked about yesterday. He mentioned the potential, somebody would have to be a special fit to bring them in. Is this guy a special fit? I don't know. He's certainly the most talented running back. The moment he steps into the door at the NovaCare complex tonight, he's, from a talent perspective, he's the Eagles' best running back. How that shakes out, how he fits into the locker room, how he sort of ingratiates himself into this offense mid-season. Remember, this is a 7-1 team. He'll be joining this team for week 9, so it's not easy. This is not baseball. This is not basketball. This is not plug and play in the NFL. You have to learn a new offense. You have to learn new terminology. So for the short term, I think it's status quo. But definitely for long term, obviously they want to get him on the field, and I could see it eventually coming. This running back by committee is all of a sudden going to be 2 guys, and it's going to be Jay Ajayi and it's going to be LeGarrette Blount, and you can forget about Wendell Smallwood especially.
Yeah, John, you talk about long term. Let's talk short term. Will he play this week?
Well, I don't know. First, he's got to pass his physical. That's a concern because he's had knee problems. One of the reasons he was a 5th-round pick was because he had some knee issues at Boise State. And in Miami this year, they basically gave him a day off every week, whether it was Wednesday or Thursday, sort of manage his knees. So that's the first concern. You got to get through that hurdle. Second, he's got to be here. I imagine if he passes his physical, he'll be on the practice field tomorrow. And then we'll start to see how the Eagles want to approach this. You can say if there is, 1 or 2 positions most likely where you can throw guys in right away, running back would be one of them, at least from a standpoint of running the football, because that's something you don't need a lot of practice doing. It's sort of a natural thing. But when you talk about a 3rd down role, you talk about pass protection, you talk about catching the ball out of the backfield, I can't see him throwing him into that role that quickly, because that's more of a sort of a chemistry thing, and that's more, you have to know the offense, you have to know who to pick up on certain blitzes and things of that nature. So that part of it will probably go a little bit slower. But, obviously this team wasn't happy with the way Wendell Smallwood fit into things once Darren Sproles got injured, and ultimately I think he's earmarked for that role.
Ajayi, John, was not having a great year. Now, he did have a great year last year, and Howie even talked about a couple of 200-yard games, but why do you think he was not having a similar year to the one he had last year?
Well, there's a lot of reasons. I mean, the Dolphins stink. They have the 32nd ranked offense in the NFL, so that's dead last. Their quarterback got hurt. Their offensive line is terrible. And the head coach is struggling. As I mentioned, he's a 39-year-old guy, and if you think about his reputation as sort of an offensive wizard, he's upset that offense is that bad. And he's quoted calling it garbage. And he has called out his players, one of them being Ajayi, as guys who don't do the extra work and sort of take homework home and do extra things to be effective. And that's where I brought up at the beginning of the conversation. To me, that sounds like a little bit of a bitter guy who is, failing, to be quite honest, and certainly failing at what he's supposed to be good at, and that's offensive football. And he's sort of shouldering the blame on younger players. So I go, kind of full circle for everyone who thought the Eagles made a mistake by not getting Adam Gase and settling for Doug Peterson. Where are you now?
They're listening to John McMullen talk on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. John, how does his style, Ajayi's style, fit into what Philly's trying to do, running the football and receiving the football, and then maybe most importantly in pass protection, because I know that's an element that they are looking for?
Yeah, and that's the part of this that doesn't fit, because he's a very, very similar player to LeGarrette Blount. I would say, he's a very big back. And he has ability when he's not as big as LeGarrette, but nonetheless, when he starts going north to south, he's really, really difficult to deal with. Now, to Ajayi's credit, he worked really, really hard in the off season. From some people in Miami I talked to become a better pass protector. He wanted to be a third down back. He worked very hard at his pass protection. He started this season out in that role and was demoted, so it wasn't going well. Now, again, whether that was because of some of the other issues or it's him, that's what we're going to have to kind of find out as we go. Is he better than what the Eagles had at this stage? Probably. But to me, he's a very similar player to LeGarrette Blount. So you're going to have two, especially as runners. So you're going to have two guys that are virtually the same, and you don't have a good change of pace as you once had when Darren Sproles was healthy.
Johnny Mack's with us here on the Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. And one thing for sure is the Eagles now have added, and it's, I guess, that move that says they recognize where they are, and this is we're going for a moment. It appears they have not done anything else as the deadline has come and gone. But is this enough? Is this move enough to say that the Eagles are all in?
Well, yeah, I mean, they're all in. I think that this move exemplifies that. I'm not sure it was necessary. I mean, to be honest, this team already has the best record in the NFL. And I'm not sure if this makes them that much better as opposed to adding maybe a better alternative at left tackle or a better alternative at middle linebacker. But as Howie mentioned today, pick good players off trees. And in a lot of ways, this might be better long-term because obviously LeGarrette's 30 years old. He signed a one-year deal. He's not the answer long-term, whereas Ajayi at 24, and he's still under contract for 2 more years at a very low price on his rookie deal. he could end up being the long-term answer as a running back if his knees hold up. So I think in a lot of ways, it's not about going all in. It's about adding talent, and it might be more impactful come 2018, no matter what the Eagles do this season.
Some reports that he had some knee issues, that's why the Dolphins were willing to let him go, that they didn't have plans for him past this year. Anything on that?
Yeah, he did. I mean, I kind of, he was a fifth-round pick because he had knee issues. He probably would have been a second or third-round guy. And the Dolphins were very careful with him this year, and they gave him a day off at practice every single week. So whether the two heavy practice days are always Wednesdays and Thursday during a normal NFL week, he was given off one of those days pretty much every week because the Dolphins were concerned about his long-term viability. So that's legitimate, and that is a concern.
We're talking with John McMullen. A lot of action in the NFL as the trade deadline is now passed. How about last night? It got underway. Jimmy Garoppolo from New England to San Francisco. Connect the dots on what the domino effects of that move become.
Well, I think the biggest domino is Kirk Cousins because that was the most logical landing spot for him, San Francisco, and sort of a reunion with Kyle Shanahan. So from that perspective, I think when you look at the landscape and you look at the fact that Cousins is probably going to be available, and this is also, at least early in the process, supposed to be a pretty quarterback-heavy draft as far as good prospects, a little bit surprised from San Francisco's standpoint that they made that move because they're obviously going to have the first or second pick. So they could have made a decision between Cousins and whether you like Sam Darnold or Josh Rosen or Josh Allen, one of those players. And essentially they said Jimmy Garoppolo was better than all of them. I'm not sure I agree with that. From the Patriots' perspective, and Bill Belichick said it today on his conference call, they wrote it as long as they could. And they knew they were going to lose him, and they had to get something for him. And essentially they're going to get, it's a second-round pick, but remember, because the 49ers are so bad, it's probably going to be the 33rd or 34th pick in the draft. So that's a pretty significant draft choice.
Dwayne Brown from Houston to Seattle. By the way, before we go, did you think San Francisco, good deal, gave up too much? Did you like the deal for both sides? What do you make of the actual trade, second-rounder?
Well, I like the deal from the Patriots' perspective. As I said, they were going to lose him. They knew that. So to get, as I said, the 33rd or 34th overall selection, that's likely what it's going to be. That's pretty good. From San Francisco's, I'd rather have Kirk Cousins than Jimmy Garoppolo, but they can probably get him for cheaper than they could have gotten Cousins on the open market. And there's no guarantee because there's going to be a lot of suitors for Kirk Cousins, not only the 49ers projected, but also if you think about Jacksonville, you think about how good that defense is, and Denver, for that matter. Coming in to face Philadelphia, you can imagine how good they might be with a competent quarterback. So there was no guarantee they were going to get him, and they feel comfortable with Jimmy Garoppolo.
All right, Brown goes from Houston to Seattle. There's Seattle saying, all right, this is us making our move as the top team in the NFC. Do you like the move for Houston, though, giving up on Dwayne Brown, them saying, you know what, we like where we are?
Yeah, I mean, I love the move for Seattle. I don't think they've had a good offensive lineman for poor Russell Wilson since Russell Okung was in his prime, and certainly not at left tackle. I mean, it's astonishing. They've been a significant Super Bowl contender throughout his entire career, and they've always had a bad offensive line, and I mean always. So to get a really good left tackle, finally, Seattle does something for Russell Wilson. They had to do it. From Houston's perspective, remember, he held out. He was gone for the entire first half of the season. And then he was very, very upset about Bob McNair's quotes and comments about the national anthem controversy. So you had a lot of things going on with Dwayne Brown, and sort of the marriage was broken in Houston. So from that perspective, I think the Texans did a good job. Even though they lost a good player, they were able to get a cornerback that's going to play at least a nickel corner in Jeremy Lane. They got a second-round pick later in 2019. That's the most significant part of it, and a fifth-round pick. So that's a pretty good haul for a guy who's 32 and didn't play for the entire first half of the season.
Johnny Mac's with us. A trade just came down. The Panthers have traded Kelvin Benjamin to Buffalo. We know the Buffalo receiving core not very good. They're 5-2. That's their moment, I guess, of saying, New England, we're coming after you.
Yeah, and remember who's in Buffalo: Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane, the GM, and where they came from, which is Carolina. So they know a lot about Benjamin and what he brings to the table, and they're obviously desperate for wide receiver help. So they're a weird team because, as you mentioned, they're 5-2. They're overachieving. A lot of people thought they were tanking. They're giving up veteran talent. They traded Marcel Darius earlier in this process. So they're kind of weird, but now they're, I think, feeling their oats and saying, hey, maybe we can finally end that playoff drought, which, started in 1999. So they haven't made the playoffs in this century.
Also, by the way, a couple news and notes today around the league. Let's get the Ezekiel Elliott story from you. Bizarre stuff here. He's suspended. He's not suspended. He is suspended.
Explain it to me, Johnny Mac, so I can go out and tell the rest of the people.
Judge is the wife of the judge. The wife of the judge is part of the CBA. What's going on here?
Well, everybody, forget about the judge, but everybody says because it's New York, the court. The previous court was in Texas, so people assumed that they were Dallas fans. Judges don't care about the NFL, trust me. But from his perspective, I said it back in August from day one when he was suspended. He's ultimately going to serve a suspension. There is no doubt. And when I say no doubt, I mean no doubt. Not 99%, 100% he's going to be suspended. This is all about putting him off as long as possible. Now he's suspended. He's got 24 hours. He's probably going to appeal again. And ultimately, I could see him getting a stay or a temporary restraining order. So the only question is he going to be suspended this week or is he going to be suspended at the start of next season? That's always been the end game here. Hey, he's got his legal rights, and if he wants to push it as far as he can, he certainly has that ability to do so. I expect him to appeal. We'll see how that rolls out, but ultimately he's going to be suspended.
We also have, there's a lot going on today, John. We also have here that Kiko Alonso and Fletcher Cox, both not suspended. Any surprise on either there?
Not Fletcher. I mean, there's nothing there that warrants a suspension. Kiko, a little bit, only because the NFL tends to do things they react to sort of the ending and the fact that Joe Flacco was hurt and bleeding. I thought maybe he would get a suspension. A lot of that has to do with your history, though. And you remember, Mike, when I first talked about that, Kiko doesn't have a history of being a dirty player. So when you have suspensions, a lot of it has to do with your prior behavior as well. And if there were other instances of him during sort of 50-50 hits, might have been illegal, might not, he probably would have gotten suspended. But it was the first time, so it'll be fine, and that'll be it.
All right, Johnny Mac here on the Sports Bash, 97.3 ESPN. The Eagles acquired Jay Ajayi today for a fourth-round pick, John, which means they have a first and 2 fourths, no second, no third. So, a little lighter in the fourth round.
And get this, guys, real quick, before you let me go. Not positive, haven't gotten confirmation, but I believe, or at least from what I'm hearing, that the Eagles sent the fourth-round pick they got from the Vikings in the Sam Bradford trade. If that's true, essentially, Howie Roseman got Derek Barnett and Jay Ajayi for Sam Bradford.
Yep, I believe that you are right on that deal that they sent the 4th-round pick from Minnesota to them. Johnny Mac here on the Sports Bash at JF McMullen. Follow him there. Tons of coverage on this Eagles trade at our website, 973ESPN.com, including the impact on what it means for LeGarrette Blount's role moving forward. Check that out at 973ESPN.com. Thank you, John.
Hey, thanks, guys.